Hi, I'm Debbie Jegede and I'm a practicing physician associate, part of the Royal College of Physicians.
I'm Theo Deproost. I'm a photographer and artist, and I've been focusing my practice on exploring museum collections for the last few years.
So, Theo, what drew you to the Royal College of Physicians collection?
Well, I was really excited to be invited to look around the Royal College of Physicians collection because I've been working with the collections at other museums for the last few years, but I also am deeply interested in the history of medicine. So for me, this was just a fantastic opportunity to combine both things. How did you find your experience of visiting the college and seeing the collection for the first time?
So, it was a really exciting opportunity to be approached to be part of this project. I hadn't been to the Royal College of Physicians building, so it was a great opportunity for me to see the building, but to also see the library and museum and see how medicine had progressed.
So, with your medical background, what were you focusing on when we looked around the collection to select the objects for the exhibition?
Respiratory medicine's always been something that I'm passionate about because that was the speciality I worked in when I first qualified. So it was kind of what I narrowed my ideas around when we were selecting objects. It's quite an interesting process just to see how the equipment had changed from in the past to now. I don't know, from a photographer's point of view, how did you find the selection process?
Yes, it was a very interesting process. It was great to be led by your interest as a medical professional, and it definitely helped me to look at some of the objects in a different way and to understand the function of them more. I suppose I then had to bring the sort of more creative mindset to it as well, and then start to think about whether the objects would actually translate into a really intriguing and arresting image for our exhibition as well.
After the selection process, what were the next steps for you as a photographer in the exhibition?
I think my core aims with all of my projects that have been based around museum collections is to really and literally show the objects in a new light and create new narratives for them and just allow the viewers to experience and explore the objects in a new way. The colours of the lights are often opposed to the true colours of the object, but what this does do is really brings out the detail of an object. I think it stops the viewer just glancing at something and kind of assuming they just know what they're looking at and then looking away without truly focusing on the detail. I like trying to give a bit of life to inanimate objects, so trying to sort of compose them in a certain way whilst obviously having to be very careful of the
Yeah.
objects themselves. So you actually visited me on one of my shoot days. How did you find that?
So I was quite excited to come and visit just so I could see how the objects had been transformed into images and just to see all the work that goes into taking a photo. Just because in my head it's just a camera, bit of light, and taking a picture, but just to see all the work that went behind it was really interesting to see.
With my work, it never really, although we end up with sort of single images as the outcome, there are so many more sort of processes that kind of go on before we reach that. So even when photographing, I'll often need to take multiple shots to then create the final image. The smoky backgrounds that you can see in the images were shot separately, so then those have to be combined with the shots of the objects. And then after that, there's still a kind of process of cleaning up and making sure that there are no tiny bits of sort of dust or hair that you can see when the images are blown up to the kind of amazing size of prints that we have in front of us. Was there a single object that really stood out for you as your favourite?
All the objects were really interesting, but I think the one that stood out to me most was the cycler's mask, just the way it looked, the different filters, just to see that that's how they were seeing how polluted the area was and how that we use masks now for COVID, but actually in the general public, cyclists don't use masks.
I think as an object, the glass nasal inhaler may actually be my favourite because it has a sort of oddly organic form and just quite a soft rounded shape that almost reminded me a bit like a heart, and also just the intricacy of the tiny glass tube within it. Did you find any sort of strong personal kind of memories, or maybe from your training in medicine, that came out while we were looking through the collection?
So it was really interesting to see the selection of stethoscopes and how that had changed from the past to now. Just how the design had progressed and how it changed and the materials used. And just to get from a creative point of view, like how this could be interpreted in a photo, It was really interesting to see how you perceive the images as well. Did you pick up anything about the medical profession or about medicine during this whole process?
Maybe fundamentally from hearing your day to day that it's very hard. And obviously, we should all be very appreciative of anyone that works in medicine now. But yeah, and maybe also just the contrast of how the medical profession is now and to maybe how it was at other points in history. I find that collaborating in this way has actually created a really strong outcome that perhaps is a really effective way of exploring sort of any museum collection and sharing it with a wider audience, because you've got sort of both influences of your sort of knowledge and experience of the profession itself, and then my sort of creative knowledge to come out with an end product that hopefully an audience will find interesting. That perhaps neither of us could have quite done that alone without the influence of the other one. Do you sort of agree with that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it is important that both of us were part of it, because I think as a medical professional, I probably wouldn't have been able to transform and translate the objects into something that the wider population would find interesting. The objects are not just there for like medical purposes, but it's also accessible to a wider population, so that there's questions raised for them how it was used. It makes it more interesting for them as well, because I think if it was just something that I did, I'd probably pick things based on their use and not how they look. So just putting that both together, I think, has been really important, and I think it's all turned out pretty good, to be fair.